Wednesday afternoon of spring session. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for your practice. Really appreciate it. I appreciate being here too. So this talk's going to be a little bit different than would normally be normally, period, and especially during session, because it's a little bit academic. But Cho and I collaborated a little bit right before session, which we had done in December for Ohatsu, and kind of coordinated our talks some. So we weren't just randomly each talking about whatever came to mind. And so he suggested that we think about Peter Gregory, who's just recently passed, and that he had an affinity for the Lotus Sutra. And so I spent a couple of days doing some research, and I'm just going to really make some introductory comments about it, and then hopefully maybe pass the baton to Choa in the rest of the week to dig in to. There's a lot here. So I want to say thank you to Peter Gregory and all the folks who are Buddhist scholars. It amazes me when I think about people that study Tibetan or Japanese or Chinese or Pali or Sanskrit to be able to read things in the original language and also be able to translate them. It's pretty phenomenal to me to think about somebody devoting their life to that. So I apologize in advance. I'm going to be talking a lot from notes because I'm just learning about this and digesting it with you. So, and I thought I would, in case anybody's interested, several of the sources that I found, including a great talk by a Buddhist scholar from SUNY in New York. It's a talk about 40 minutes long. I think I'll put those all in an email to Choa, and then if anybody else is interested in looking further, you'll have a little bit of the benefit of my little bit of advanced research. So Peter Gregory, and when I saw his picture on the Smith College website, I did recognize him. I think that I must have seen him at some point at CCLA. But so was a past president and a past executive director, so some type of administrative role with I just want to make sure I say the full title correctly. The Kuroda Institute for the Study of Buddhism and Human Values, which is it's really interesting because Maezumi Roshi founded that in 1976. And he facilitated gathering these scholars together who were interested in authentic translation and communication of some of the ancient texts. And he named it after his father, Bayan Hakujin Kuroda Roshi. And of course, he's in our lineage that we chant every day. So we have a direct relationship through the Kuroda Institute with Peter Gregory. And since we're mentioning him in the morning service, it's really nice to know who was this person and what's our relationship to him. So I really appreciated Choa bringing that up and sort of sending me down this, I wouldn't say rabbit hole, but just mining expedition of a little preliminary understanding of what is the Lotus Sutra all about. So just a couple more moments on Peter Gregory. He spent 15 years at Smith College and 15 years at University of Illinois, and I guess devoted his scholarly life to texts from medieval China. This was really interesting too, is he was he was the producer for a film entitled The Gate of Sweet Nectar, Feeding Hungry Spirits in an American Zen Community, which was based at CCLA. I see Igo's nodding, so maybe he's seen it. I was unaware of it, but clearly there's some kind of connection to Bernie, right? And then he also wrote a book, or co-edited a book entitled Women Practicing Buddhism, American Experiences, which was just published in 2007. So really, a broad work from in exploring Buddhism and particularly related to our practice. So thank you, Choa, for needing to look into who Peter Gregory was, and just amazing how all of us live a life and make these contributions, and it's kind of nice to have them acknowledged as well. So basically, a sutra is reputed to be a discourse of the Buddha. And so it constitutes a basic text from that perspective. And of course, we chant the Heart Sutra every day, and which is chanted in Mahayana temples around the world, from what I understand. And as I was reading about the Lotus Sutra, it's reputed to be the most renowned Mahayana sutra worldwide. So I found it pretty interesting that I had never explored it whatsoever. I think I've heard of it, but and then Choa mentioned to me that when we chant the Gate of Sweet Nectar, when we say being one with Mahayana Siddharma Pundarika Sutra, that is the Sanskrit title of the Lotus Sutra. So every time we're doing the Gate of Sweet Nectar, we're saying, I am one with the Lotus Sutra, which I also found an interesting discovery. And, just as a side note, maybe the main point, maybe a side note, I don't know. But, in our regular Zen practice, so much we focus, I think, really, in a great way on right now, right this, as this, as me, as this, and the discovery of our true nature in a very sort of immediate and non-flowery kind of way, beyond words and concepts. No, that's Zen. And I am also kind of startled, I would say, in a way, when we do the Gate of Sweet Nectar, just listening to the dedications of the morning service today. And then I was really struck by this when we did our kind of empowerment rituals for being authorized to give Jukai. All of it is about gratitude to the ancestors, to the spirits, to the guardians of the temples, to the guardians of the Dharma. So this whole sort of cosmological sense of things that we talk about very little, in my experience, is very present in our practice as well. And apparently, in the very beginning, like the preface of the Lotus Sutra. So I'm just kind of using this as an example. So this is before the Buddha starts his discourse that is to be the Lotus Sutra. A huge light beam comes out from the center of his forehead between his eyebrows, and tons of arhats and bodhisattvas and nuns and monks and animals and creatures come forth to hear the discourse. So, this is pretty metaphysical, big stuff, and we could take it as metaphor, but who knows, but so comes forth in that situation. And so I'm gonna go to my notes a little bit here so I somewhat stay on track. So what I found consistently from several sources is that the Lotus Sutra is considered to be the cornerstone of Mahayana Buddhism. The formal title is, which there's various translations, but Sutra on the White Lotus of the True Dharma, that it deeply influenced Buddhist philosophy worldwide. And this is one of the super interesting things. Okay, so it's reputedly was composed between the 1st and 2nd century Common Era. So it was not reputedly composed during the lifetime of Buddha, but it's reputed to be the compilation of all the Buddhist teachings. So that's interesting. And I'm sure there's all kinds of controversy around that, most of which I know nothing about, but I can imagine that there is, right? It's just natural that there would be. And one of the, and I'll get to this, like the 3 main teachings of the Lotus Sutra, one of which is one Dharma, and how the little that I understand from what I've read is that, and it makes total sense from a Mahayana perspective, let's just say that, which is that prior there were supposedly like 3 routes to Buddhahood. And the first is the Arhat route. So, and that would be, from a Mahayana perspective, that would be like Hinayana, like the small vehicle, right? Which you can obviously imagine, that immediately causes controversy. But so basically the thought there is that we practice to attain nirvana, to attain freedom, liberation for ourselves. And that's the Arhat path. Then the middle one was kind of interesting, and I didn't remember. It's maybe Pratyatara, but I don't think so. It's a word that sounds like that, which is that people have spontaneous awakenings all through time, all through pre-time, right? There's just been awakening. It's not owned by any particular tradition. So that's considered the second way, second vehicle. And then the third is Mahayana, which is the Bodhisattva way. And so that's, as we chant every morning and is one will not awaken until all beings are awakened. So I've thought for a while, I feel like that's skillful means. What apparently the Buddha said, I'm not taking any credit here, is that all of this was skillful means leading up to this sense of one vehicle. So apparently what he said in this prelude to the Lotus Sutra is that when I talked, so I'm speaking as the Buddha, when I talked about arhatship, that was a skillful means, because it would be overwhelming for folks to think, oh my gosh, I have to liberate all beings before I can pass into parinirvana. So it was a skillful means to get people on the path. So apparently, the story goes, when the Buddha said this, 5,000 arhats got up and left Mount Kudachutra. But apparently this is one of the 3 principles that's understood to be contained in the Lotus Sutra. Also, just to say, because I don't want to forget to mention this, I was amazed. There's 28 chapters. I think they're considered to be maybe the last 4 to 6 of them were written quite a bit later. And I'm going to read some of the titles to you at some point, because it's just fascinating, just as a literary work, if you only take it as that. But there's a lot of parables. I think there's 8 parables in the Lotus Sutra that are, some of which are familiar to us. in the story of the burning house, the father can't get his kids they're on their devices or something, he can't get them out of the burning house. And so he says there's these luxurious wagons outside that have all the greatest toys and all the greatest stuff in them. And that's his vehicle for getting them out of the burning house. And of course, the metaphor for us is we need to be enticed that there is a way out of suffering, and even to see that we are suffering. So anyway, there's these 8 different parables contained in the Lotus Sutra, and several of them were familiar to me, and I had no idea where they had come from. The gem that's sewn into the coat. So I think that you'll see that quite a bit of that would be familiar. So this also, the Buddha said, these are skillful means. These are teaching stories that are skillful means. And the second, so all vehicles of Buddhism are one vehicle. And that there are many, many different schools and many, many different practices and many, many different ways. They all are intertwined. And they all have the potential for awakening. So that's the principle of the one vehicle. So part of it is the Bodhisattva way is sort of the ultimate way, but I think there's a lot of ways to see, in a way, the Bodhisattva vow is skillful means as well. Some of us may feel like, okay, yeah, I just want to really help others, and it's okay if I wait my turn. And as awakening contains everyone automatically. So I think, in a way, even the Bodhisattva vow is skillful means, in my opinion, just my opinion. And so the second principle is that all beings have the potential to be Buddha. So we would say, from a Zen perspective, all beings already are Buddha. And I read that how this was quoted was, Buddha nature has implicity, meaning it's implicitly understood that all beings are nothing but Buddha nature. So it's completely inclusive, completely non-exclusive. So one of the examples that was also given was that apparently there's a whole line of thinking and is considered to be maybe original Buddhism, that one could not become a bodhisattva in a female form. That one would need to have the training, the power, the insight, whatever would cause that to happen, to come into a male form in order to become a bodhisattva. And so this second principle is also saying that's not true. That's not necessary. That's not required. Nobody has to turn into anything else to come in contact with their own Buddha nature. So that's pretty revolutionary. And then the third is also, it's so obvious, but it's so kind of mind-blowing at the same time, which is that the Buddha's lifespan is immeasurable and that he's still present in the world. So another source said this as cosmic energy. And the explanation is the biography and apparent death, passing into parinirvana, final nirvana of Shakyamuni Buddha, are portrayed as an illusory manifestation, a skillful means to teach others. Multiple Buddhas exist in the same place and time, and countless streams of Buddhas extend throughout all space and time, and unquantifiable eons, according to the Lotus Sutra. And that the Lotus Sutra emphasizes a sense of timelessness and the inconceivable by using huge numbers like 10,000 kalpas and, a billion eons. So again, from our perspective, kind of in a way obvious that the Buddha is present now. So that's all of us and everything. And this sense, sort of this bigger cosmological sense that, so that one of the stories is that during the time that the Buddha is doing the discourse on the Lotus Sutra, that some type of huge, giant, jeweled stupa, like a comet comes in from the sky and lands there. And so the Buddha goes up to it and knocks on the door. And there's already a Buddha sitting inside there. So the Buddha goes in and sits next to the other Buddha, and the Buddha that's already in the stupa says, well, I had vowed that anytime the Lotus Sutra is being revealed, that I will come to visit. So this parable is taken as evidence that there is not just one Buddha. And so that's pretty consistent with our practice as well. And then the relevance to Japanese Zen that's specifically talked about by the scholars. So this is Taigen Dan Layton, and also Donald Lopez talks about it, that Dogen writes in Shobogenzo that compared with the Lotus Sutra, all other sutras are merely its servants, its relatives, for it alone expounds the truth. What was kind of interesting too, there's a talk called The Lotus Sutra as a Source for Dogen's Discourse Style by Taigen Dan Layton. And basically he's saying that Dogen felt a resonance and a corroboration of his discourse style by seeing the discourse style in the Lotus Sutra. So I thought that was pretty interesting. And that according to Taigen, while Dogen's writings employ many sources, probably along with his own intuitive meditative awareness, his direct citations of the Lotus Sutra indicate his conscious appropriation of its teachings as a significant source. And certainly with Maizumi Roshi and my experience of him teaching, Dogen was sacrosanct. That's who he always referred to, gave lots of talks about from Shobogenzo. So he had, obviously, and Dogen is, considered the literary giant from Japan. So this direct connection through Maizumi Roshi's regard for Dogen to the Lotus Sutra as well. And then apparently, this is repeatedly what's reported by the historians, that during his final days, Dogen spent his time reciting and rewriting the Lotus Sutra. So one of the practices of the Lotus Sutra is actually sutra copying. Writing the Lotus Sutra in his room, which he named the Lotus Sutra Hermitage. And then Rinzai Master Hakuin Ekaku reportedly achieved enlightenment while reading the third chapter of the Lotus Sutra. This is so touching. I just want to read this quote to you, which is from Donald Lopez's book entitled The Lotus Sutra, a Biography, which is interesting choice of words. One night after some time, I took up the Lotus Sutra. This is Hakuin talking. Suddenly, I penetrated to the perfect, true, ultimate meaning of the lotus. The doubts I had held initially were destroyed, and I became aware that the understanding I had obtained up until then was greatly in error. Unconsciously, I uttered a cry, a great cry, and burst into tears. So these old Zen guys had big hearts too. So I'll just kind of close and then just see if there's any comments. So, what does all this mean for our practice? I think that, we're in session right now. It's super important to stay focused. Super important to consider anything in a Dharma talk, how it's relevant to us, each of us, and may or may not be. Let it go in one ear and out the other. But I think the first thing is obvious, is just if there's anything that strikes you, is an opportunity to kind of penetrate into that. Why? What touched me or didn't touch me or felt relevant? And that the Lotus Sutra also it talks about the Eightfold Path, and it includes practice, and that the reassurance in a certain way that when we take up practice of the heart, and in this specific setting, we're talking about Zen Buddhism as a practice, that it is a gateway to deeper understanding and understanding of our lives, being awake in our lives, and the opportunity to really look into deeply who we really are and what is our intention of how to live. And it does strike me that in the Lotus Sutra, where apparently the Buddha is talking about sort of skillful means and how we get off track, that's also where our practice of the precepts is so helpful. Not as things to beat ourselves up with or feel bad about that we don't do them all perfectly all the time, but really as if we want to be awake, these are things to watch out for. And we all pretty much have to be watching out all the time. So for how our, aversion and clinging causes us to suffer. So in that sense, it seems like, the Lotus Sutra is offering practicality as well. Yeah, and then I guess the last thing I wrote down, the Lotus Sutra teaches that since all non-living and living things, including human beings, are manifestations of the great life force of the universe and beyond, all of them are equal in terms of the fundamental value of their existence. And that's all of us. So I'm going to stop there. Okay, it's 5:20. So, and I know we don't usually do questions and all during session Dharma talks. So I guess I'll have to just close. And I genuinely hope this has been of some value. I really, really enjoyed digging into this and all the fantastical aspects of it and all the kind of reassurance of our direct connection to it. So I hope it's of some value. I have the utmost confidence that Choa can take the next leg and run with it. And there's a lot to dig into if there's anything that piqued your interest. So hope it's of value, and main thing is just steadily keep on going.